Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Mark Anthony's Music Picks. Today is episode 134, and for today's concept, I'm going to be revisiting a concept that I did probably about 6 months or a year ago, which was what I called the original Fluff Prog. So today will be part two to the original Fluff Prog episode. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the term Fluff Prog, I'll quickly go through it. Fluff Prog in modern times is represented by labels like Lost and Found by Guy J and All Day I Dream by Lee Burridge. And it's been relabeled as organic house or organic deep house or deep house, and maybe has a touch of tribal to it and very light, fluffy, inoffensive melodies. And modern fluff prog, to me, at this point, I'm pretty much done buying it. I feel like it's been rinsed and it all permutations have been reached. There's really nothing left to me in that genre. So I stopped sampling it. I'm not buying it anymore. It's just going to become this thing that when you look back on it, you can say, yes, that's definitely a 2018 record. You'll just be able to very easily put it into a time capsule. I'm not saying that those records aren't good. There's definitely a time and place for them. Maybe in a set you can drop 3 or 4 of them, but to have entire days or sessions, 8-hour sessions composed of this, there's no way I would be able to do it. Just no way. So I think it already reached its peak and it's on its way out, and I hope something more interesting replaces it. But that being said, there also was a first iteration of Fluff Prog, in my opinion, and I think I described this in my first Fluff Prog episode, but it essentially is very specifically confined to 2005 to 2008. That's the window for the original Fluff Prog, and it was basically a melding of melodic progressive house. Now, let me just say, progressive house mainly peaked from about 1997 to 2004. There were traces of progressive house that started appearing as far back as 1990s, 91, 92. But you know, the main absolute madness of progressive house, I would say, is 2001 to 2003. Started trailing off by 2004, and by 2005, electro took over. And in some of the tracks that I'm going to talk about today, you can maybe hear some of the soft mushiness of electro. Also, tech house was relatively prominent, tech house / minimal in 2006 with labels like Minus. So there's elements of just touches of tech house and minimal in Fluff Prog. And there's also, like I said, the melodics of progressive house. So to summarize, you've got the trifecta of electro, tech house, minimal, and progressive house all coming in, sort of meeting in the middle in a time period where electronic music was sort of directionless and had lost its way. And most of that music, to me, hasn't aged well. A ton of it hasn't. If you were buying a ton of records in that era, you probably threw them out, and rightfully so. But there's a few gems that did survive the test of time, and those are the ones that I'm going to go through with you today. And to get started here, I'm going to go with a producer that is really prolific, makes a ton of records, but for the most part, he's not somebody that's normally in my wheelhouse. I think I might have 3 or 4 records by this guy altogether. So let's start with John Tejada's The End of It All. This came out in 2006. It looks like the label is Word and Sound. Oh no, it's on Palette. It's on his label, Palette. And this, I learned about this originally in a Steve Lawler mix, which is actually uploaded on my channel. It's called the Steve Lawler Wasted Mix, which came out in 2006. It has A.M.P Reg in it, and another A.M.P remix by Rodamal, or A.M.P remixing Rodamal. And this was the lead-in track. And I think Steve chose this as the lead-in because it has this kind of soft, mushy, kind of slowed down intro that is a great way to start a mix, and then the track kind of like segues into what it's going to become for the next 8 minutes, which is just a melodic journey with probably 3 melodies stacking on top of each other. Like I said, some of the some of the like delayed sounds that were sort of cliche in the '05, '06 electro era, all coming together in what ended up being a classic. If you go and look at the reviews for this, people are still coming back and returning to this. And I think the main reason why is because of the charm of the melodies. Like the main thing, the main draw of progressive house is the melodics and how it makes you feel. And if you look over my shoulder, I've got a Nathan Fake record back there. This sounds more like a Nathan Fake or a James Holden record in that might have came out in like '03 than it does a John Tejada record. So it's really out of the ordinary, in my opinion, for John to make this, but I think was a shining example in his catalog, something that is really, this could go for another 100 years and people are going to love it. And here, I'll admit, I'm venturing a little bit away from what I would consider to be the fluff prog of the era, but I did want to drop this record in this episode because I think it overall this fits the context. This is Dominik Eulberg's Bionic on Cocoon. And I wanted to bring this in because it does have a very charming melody in it. And Cocoon Recordings is run by Sven Väth, and Sven has a way of curating very nice melodic tracks. He's known for techno, but a lot of the times the tracks that really get my attention on Cocoon are the ones with the really slick melodies. And in here, it's almost like a trance melody dropped over a tech house or a techno beat. But even to call this techno, if you compare this to modern techno, it's like, yeah, I think you could see the association there, but like modern techno has all become dark and heavy for the most part, at least the cliched versions of modern techno. But here you have somebody, Dominik Eulberg, pushing the boundaries and just making something like kind of eccentric. This is not going to blow the room up, but it's a track that would be good for after hours or in the evening, just something a little bit out of the ordinary. I love Dominik Eulberg, and I thought about doing an episode because I think he's a really interesting producer. One of the things you'll notice about this disc is Dominik Eulberg is very focused on plants and animals. I'm not sure if he's a biologist. I'll have to look into his bio a little bit more. But here you can see almost like a mechanical rendition of a dragonfly. Always cool stuff on his covers. And I'm going to show you the plate here too. This thing is like the vinyl equivalent of a brontosaurus fossilized hip bone. I mean, it's like two vinyls stacked on top of each other, and it's almost awkward to spin it because of how heavy and clumsy it is, but it actually does sound good for a colored picture disc. It's not very crackly or poppy or anything, but I always am stunned when I take this out of its sleeve of how heavy it is. I mean, it's just if a normal heavy vinyl is 180 grams, this has got to be double. It's just completely off the hook. But this is one of my favorite Eulberg records of all time, and I love that Dominik is still producing now, and he's still even almost 20 years after his production career started, is still dropping bombs even now. So keep checking him out, and keep an eye out for Dominik in the future. But like I said, Bionic, one of the major classics of his catalog and for Cocoon in general. And here's one that I'm guessing will probably surprise the most people on this channel because I think this record went totally off the radar. I don't see any reviews for it on Discogs. I never heard anybody talk about it. And this is by an artist that was way famous back in the late 90s. This is a Pete Heller record. And I'm guessing most of you have never seen this or heard of this before. It's his track called Simpler. This came out in 2006. And Pete Heller was known all the way back in 1998 for his monster club hit called Big Love, which was a very simple melody in its approach, but became a huge hit. And it was a Big Love was a very happy sounding track, very uplifting. And as I've indicated before, it's tough to write happy sounding tracks that are catchy and actually blow up. And he managed to do that. Here, coming back, if you look through Heller's catalog, it's relatively sparse. He doesn't release very often, maybe every few years. And this one just sort of went through. Nobody noticed it. Nobody seemed to care. And I only discovered this because of hanging out with my friend Doombot. He actually gave me this record out of his collection. He didn't want it anymore. I always liked it more than he did. And I find it very, very indicative of the sound that was happening at the time. Like I said, this is 2006. If you wanted to compare this to something or associate it with something, it's very much like the original Digweed Transitions mix, which came out, which contains all tracks that are basically like this, like the melodics of progressive house and a tech house beat and this overall like carefree, uplifting vibe. It's a very eccentric sound. And one of the other features that I love about this, well, first of all, I'm just noticing the duration of it. 9 minutes and 47. I love long records, but one of the elements that always got me in here was the little gentle snare. There's something childlike about it. I don't know if it reminds me of like a childhood song like Little Drummer Boy or something like that. There's something about that little snare roll that's in there as one of the looping, repeating elements that I just find so infectious. It reminds me very much, again, of the border community sound. There's just something super charming, childish, and innocent about it. I still remember back in 2007 hearing about Deadmau5, hearing my first Deadmau5 track. The first one I ever heard by Deadmau5 was called Sex, Lies, and Audio Tape, which I thought was a little bit underrated. I think because of the era that it came out in and the genre that it's in, which is kind of like an electro tech representation, maybe it didn't get a lot of love, but I remember hearing it in the context of a mix and thinking how great it was. And it was like one of the tracks that I really wanted to go and get an ID for. And right around that time, I started seeing Deadmau5 pop up on the forums, like Trance Addict, for example. I remember somebody on Trance Addict was talking about Deadmau5, and they had a quote in their signature that Deadmau5 exploded on the electronic scene like crack in the 80s. And that really stuck with me because it's perfect. It's so true. Deadmau5 is a producer from somewhere in Canada, I think Toronto or somewhere, and he's just a dude that he was a raver. He had a laptop and some really basic equipment and started making sounds like nobody had heard before. And I remember being out in 2008 and hanging out with a couple of Philly trance producers. I think I was hanging out with Sean Tyas or Ryan Tyas, one of the Tyas brothers, and Tom Colantonio, and they were remarking about how smooth Deadmau5 productions were. So these are relatively accomplished, producers that have been making trance and progressive trance, and they were all sitting in awe and like admiring Deadmau5 for his ability to make these simple and buttery smooth tracks. Deadmau5 went absolutely bonkers when Faxing Berlin came out, and this is on his on his Mousetrap label. This is Mousetrap 01, but Faxing Berlin had actually been out on a label digital only called Play Digital as of 2006, but it's like it didn't blow up right away. It wasn't until Mousetrap launched that Faxing Berlin went totally nuts. And talking about Fluff Prog, I mean, I would say this is basically the epitome of it, because if you think of what Fluff Prog is, it's this very inoffensive sound. And Faxing Berlin, as catchy and smooth and soft and buttery as it is, it also has the ability to kind of suck the energy out of the floor. It's not a peak hour track. It's more like you're going to start the set or end the set with it. So it definitely had its place, and it needed a specific context to be played, but it was a wonderful launching pad for Joel Zimmerman's career. If you look at it now, I mean, Mousetrap blew up, and I mean, it goes without saying that Deadmau5 gigs, they fill up even till now. I mean, he's gone about as mainstream as you can in the EDM world, but I still, you can hate on him if you want, but I still respect him for launching a sound, taking a completely different direction, and doing it all from his bedroom. And to close out the episode, another Fluff Prog producer that's still around now, still releasing this sound on his label called Rumors, is Guy Gerber. It may be pronounced Guy Gerber, but I'm not sure. I wasn't able to get anybody to verify it for me. So I'm gonna call him Guy Gerber for the rest of this episode. But Guy is a perennial melodic tech house producer. If you look at his productions, he started out with this album here, actually, on Cocoon, which I'll come back to in a second. This is his Late Bloomers. But he launched his own label, Supplement Facts, from 2007 to 2013. Everybody loved that. And now he has his Rumors label, which is still active. I saw a release just came out a few weeks ago on Rumors. And I would say the pinnacle of the Guy Gerber sound would be his Fabric mix, which came out in 2012. If you haven't heard that, that is one of the essential must-have Fabric mixes. I highly recommend it, and I feel like anybody that listens to that gets sucked into it and realizes, like, hey, this is like a 5 out of 5 here. This thing's no joke. But here, Guy showed his talent way back when. I think he actually started producing in a somewhat meandering fashion, appearing on various labels before 2007, but you couldn't really pin down his sound. Like, he appeared on Twisted Records, which was, like, I think an odd label for him to even make an appearance on. and a couple of other lesser known labels. And it wasn't, I feel like he didn't really come into his own and hit full stride until you get here. And my choice for here on this album is the track Late Bloomers. It's one of the moodiest tracks that I've ever heard from Guy Gerber. It's obviously dark, very sinister. It has kind of a low energy to it. And I would just love to hear this out in a big room. I think it would just put a scary, eerie fog and haze into the room that would be hard to reproduce with any other track. And thinking back to this, there was a mix that I heard. I'm pretty sure Guy made it himself. There was a mix where Late Bloomers was mashed up with Larry Heard's Sun Can't Compare. And I always wanted that to be released. If anybody can point me to that mix, I would love to go and maybe even get an excerpt of that and upload it to YouTube, because it was one of the most brilliant mashups that I've ever heard. If you think about Larry Heard's Sun Can't Compare, it's a very kind of downtrodden kind of sound, a sad track, right? So to mix it, to have the insight to mix that with Late Bloomers, I don't know if somebody realized that they're in the same key, if it was something about the girl's voice, but the genius that came together of mixing those two is just incredible. So Guy Gerber, props to you for staying with it for almost 15 years now and just cranking out nothing but quality. We love it. That's all for my original Fluff Prog episode. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Thank you to all the producers I mentioned here, and everyone that subscribes, please comment down below. I love to hear from you guys and let me know your thoughts on these tracks. Take care.